che dang so ki chonam la chan chu par so da ni kyap sun che la ge jin so gi pe chonam gi do la pen che sung ge do pa sang ge che dang so ki chonam la chan chu par so da ni kyap sun la ge jin so gi pe chonam gi do la pen che sung ge do pa so sang ge che dang so ki chonam 장주 버도 다니 겹순제 나게 진소 기베 손음 롤라 벤처 상예로 바르죠 심전 탐제 대화 당 대외 유당 덴바라 심전 탐제 롱어당 롱어게 유당 타워 심전 탐제 롱어메베 대화 당 민다 심전 탐제 니린 차당 니당 냠라 네 파라큐르지 심전 탐제 대화당 대외 유당 덴바 심전 탐제 롱어당 롱어게 유당 타워 심전 탐제 롱어메베 대화당 민다워 규지 심전 니린 차당 니당 타 냠라 네 파라큐르지 심전 탐제 대화 대외 유당 덴바라 규지 심전 탐제 롱어 동아기 교당 타워라 규지 심전다 동아메 베데와다 민다와 규지 니린 차단이단다 다녀만네 버라 규지 심전 탐제 대와다 대위 교당 담바 심전 탐제 동아당 동아기 교당 타워라 규지 심전 동아메 베데와다 민다와 규지 심전다 니린 차단이단다 냠라네 바라교지 사지베 주제메도좀 제로니지 녜레옌바디 송게진도 메덴부아이 르케난다 진라에 쯔바 쇼이담 구루르나멘달라카니야다야미.
Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. This ground, spread with incense, adorned with strewn flowers, Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon, I imagine as a Buddha land, and by offering it to you, May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Thus, meeting the teaching of the peerless teacher is due to the spiritual mentor's kindness. I dedicate this virtue for all living beings to be cared for by excellent spiritual friends. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami.
동계 도중에 좀와 다와던 제 동배치를 동배치는 동배 고담대라 차자로 야다 가르쳐 버렸다 우마 턴규를 따와 다 최담자 라진기면나 타니도 여봐 타니도 여탕데 하고 가도 빼면서 그 전부 차디가 레스와 지 하마거나 다 가르쳐 그래 senzamba menjegi umapala 저번에 시그마로와 와다테 빼 미스를 내 전부 차디어레스
And so here in the beginning, we start out with the understanding of the view of Madhyamaka, the middle of the Prasangika Madhyamaka, the highest middle way view. And to understand this is very, very important. And this is the understanding that all phenomena hold no independent intrinsic existence, and that they are rather by way of convention, conventionally existent. And this is something that we really need to know. This is a view, a world view that we need to understand, this philosophical view of Prasangika Madhyamaka. And also we have to understand the different points that are debated from the other three schools, from the mind-only school down to the Vaibhashikas. We have to understand the points that are debated between this highest middle way school and the lower philosophies of the other tenet systems.
중지 장도간라 둠티 늦출대 하마거나 둠티 더바라 양다바자 하마거나 아니 중대지만 지진시야 카보야래 딘도간라 둠다 지기 늦출 배 타진 타와마거나 라림지 하고 배 미스베게 전부 차되어라 대 마세베다 우마 턴교를 타와데 시고데 텔레겐네 전부다 가르잖아 아주 둥알 두고 말아 둥알 만도 두갈라 둥알 뽕탑데 얘네메다 우마 턴교를 타와데다 무이기님 보체겐데 다 라지메 벨 타와데 차디오레 다 라지메 메나 때멜 고소나 아니 체탈롱도에 냥가요레 어떻게 인도갈라 딱배 직 아주 vengen shu chumbo yora dembar tu vengen de dembar tu dem jembe jemba de azu yula pe shu chumbo yora ote tin digala 직 오네 dembar men me gur samsamde 맞을로 ngam shu shu 용구도 ote tin digala umatan gyel tawal dembar me kyang tangi tu yothang de shena tangi tu tufa dini kebarjin je tugudo dembar me sersate karein 당이도 요상 간디임바 디지 개버 시베이나 되니 덴바르메 벨타와데 덴진라 너사데 하고로와 디긴 땅니 덴진은 너이나 덴진테오 트람페 뇨몬데 슈충르데 덴진테 트람페 뇨몬데 슈충나 뇨몬 트람페 둥알데 슈충르인도엠바 코타 라고에요 마라 리비투구로와 딘디가라 케빈테 투르마츠 데완데 둥알 민데바레 둥알 만데나 둥알기 굿 둥알 칸레 주이 유데 방과당 데와 칸레 주이 유데 두웨데 네체쇼 데 차디오레 딘디글 타와데 개첨부 차단데 데 투디오레
And so the different assertions between the philosophical schools or tenet systems of Buddhism, if we don't zero in on what they are asserting and how how all of the schools relate to each other, which views invalidate lower views, and what actually are the viewpoints that are being posited. If we don't understand those points, then we won't really understand this infrastructure of the tenet systems, of what they assert and what the other, within them, what is being negated. And that's very, very important. So we really need to understand the assertions, the assertions of all the schools. That's very, very important for us to do, to have an understanding. Otherwise, we really won't have a good understanding of the different philosophical schools and viewpoints in Buddhism. And to understand in particular the Prasangika Madhyamaka view is even more so paramount in importance. And this is because nobody desires to suffer. And when we do understand the Madhyamaka view, then we understand the very essence of the view is that things have no independent self-existent from their own side. And this, however, they are existent by means of conventions, by nominal conventions. If we don't understand that it's not just that we must understand that things aren't negated entirely or accepted entirely, or we could fall into one of the extremes. When we have the belief that things are non-existent, completely non-existent, then we can fall into the extreme of being nihilistic, thinking, oh, well, nothing exists at all then. But that's not the case. We understand that through studying Middle Way, we understand by means of conventions is meant when they posit that. And so it's very, very important, this view of Middle Way, because just kind of instinctively, we as people hold a very, very strong, solid view of a fixed reality, of a fixed and absolute true reality that's very strong in our mind stream. But when we study Madhyamaka, we understand that things are not truly and absolutely in that fixed way that we have taken them to be existent. But they are, by means of conventional conventions, existent. They are imputed conventions and existed. But those conventional phenomena hold no true, absolute existence. And when we study this view and come to understand phenomena in this way, then this somewhat instinctive fixation to a true reality is harmed, it's damaged, it begins to become invalidated. And due to that, we no longer hold such a fixed notion in appearances and in entities and phenomena. And for that reason, the destructive emotions, the negative emotions also, our emotional upsets and so forth, begin to decrease. And no need to say that when our negative emotions and destructive emotions decrease, that our suffering along with it will decrease. Because on the heels of the emotional upsets decreasing, then our own emotional mental state and the suffering therein also decreases. And so This is really a very, very profound view, this Prasangika Madhyamaka view. And this is because we really we gain benefit or profit, we could say. We really make out in a very, positive way, because what comes to pass is that the suffering that we don't desire decreases and the happiness that we want increases. And this is because we now identify the causes, the cause that brings about this unwanted suffering, and the cause that brings about wanted happiness and contentment. And so what does all this meet with, these causes that we need to understand? It really meets within this view of Prasangika Madhyamaka.
Oh, Geshe-la.
No?
Sorry, it's Mark. So there's a question I have here as you're starting to get talking about the Madhyamaka point of view. There's an earlier point of view that I'd like you to talk about concerning consciousness. Diana, I'm going to send the Tibetan definition to you because
You're sending it to me via what?
Privately. It's through chat. Okay. So if you put that up, Zukdan Zukzingi Tsema Zejingi Tonwa. So when this kind of implies that if there's not a separation between my consciousness and the thing that I'm apprehending, that I guess my understanding is that if they're both the same thing at a fundamental level, where does the diversity occur? Where does the superficiality occur? Where is it that? So the definition for everybody that I sent to Diane says that form and the valid perception that grasps at the form are empty, meaning they're the same, they're devoid of being a separate substance, devoid of being something different. How does the Madhyamaka refine that, if they do at all? And can Geshe-la talk on it a little bit?
Okay, and just this is a mind-only view. The quote that you sent me is from Mind Only, or
I think
it looks like I'm not sure, but it
manually
Yeah.
Najur chupe umarangi beten to gure.
Oh, okay.
Najur chupe umarangi bet. Thank you, Lulu. Take a shisa yomare.
Oh, lasso. Ani dene zoom ani
Zudu zunzin sama zejin ki tonwa. Then Najur chupe umarangi badan senzam beten to gure.
lasso
Chesa
dene
zud senzambe karzana zu chirul tondu dubade zugi ta gacha chaderwa. Zu chirul tondu tubyo mare zu chirul tondu tubina ani karsore chirul tondu madu the sengi paja seldubni shava samre mado zu du zunzin semani zejiris zetadaki tongor tongare ese lagare zetadaki tongdugala zugdangi chuni de tosore yongju chuni tongni zana yongju zana te togarta nelute 제가 zunzin sema zunzin semani zetade zim바데 가자래 zetade zimbe 똥아또 연드가라 중이 또래 이 sensam바다 나저쪽에 우마랑기 빌룰는 로야르마도 당규로까지 셔서요 말했어.
And so Geshe-la clarified that this is a view held by the mind-only school and or posited, a point posited by the mind-only school, and also sometimes within the lower middle way school, because the middle way school has two divisions, the lower and the upper. And when Geshe-la has been speaking,
Najur jubu umarangi bats. Najur jubu umarangi bitati yang tendugare.
Okay.
Yang te senzambe shena chima chichi mare yang. Tos senzambe lula sheba tentum dugurwa. Najur jubu umarangi bi sheba tentum dugumare ten sawangine.
Okay. So within the lower schools of Madhyamaka, there are also two divisions, one of being the Yogic division and one being the Sautantrika Madhyamaka division. And this view, or this point, is held by the middle mind-only school and by just one of those. The Naljorwa. Okay, so within the Yogic division, the Yogic view of the mind-only school. However, there are some differences. It's not completely the same, but within that division of the Madhyamaka. And so what's being said here in this point is that what is being posited is that there are no outer objects, that these objects and entities don't exist outside of oneself somewhere out there. That is a point that is being negated. That's what's being the object of negation here. And what these schools are saying in this point is that the object that is being observed and the mind itself are one single substance. It is like one seed that is ripening within the mind. It is both, it is the object and the mind itself, that it is not two different things. It is not the mind perceiving and an object outside of it, but that it is like a ripening fruition, a seed that is ripening within the mind, and that is the observation. It is a one thing that is happening in one place. So what they're saying is also is that in the mind-only school, dene sampa di ni ani dendru piomare, or just look dendru.
Sensambe ship dice gichu zembartuban duguroa shepa dendrum duguare. Ani najuchubu maragi beten dugu mariang. Take cabriare.
And
you know, najuchubu maragi bilula, ani shepa zembartuba mandugang, shepa rangun tuba shepa ransingi tuban duguare. Mayante cabriare. Ransenda dendugile cabranche duguare.
So there are many, many differences.
Tawa taragi cabrashego the payment. Tawa norgor is the lago martal. Tawa tarare. Tamut tasho the umatanguli. Umatangul tawa the tasho in the Dingolata Tende Karsora. Chutamje Yulwin tuba. Rangun tuba Dulzaman tuba Kemiling Kenderwa. Ransen tuba killing Ransenda, Rangweta, Rengu said, Gacha Chikbarwa, Sang Mambush Temba, or the Song Gacha Chikpainta, Tangu Lula. That all Omala Janet and the Chago Mariang. Kazan take your Kanga, Tangu Lujacha.
And so what's there's negated that so in the mind-only school, it's being negated that there's any true existing form out there that is like truly existent. However, they do find some substantialness of the consciousness that is perceiving. They don't completely nullify existence of any consciousness that is perceiving. However, in the yogic division of the Madhyamaka, they're not just finding emptiness within the object, they're also finding that the consciousness that perceives it also is not truly existent. And then in further divisions, the lower Madhyamaka find that there are some self-characteristics in consciousness, and that there is, or in the some self-existence in consciousness, in like in to some degree, but it is only the highest that which Geshe-la says we've been talking about for the past few weeks, the highest view of Madhyamaka that says that there is no true existence. There's not even any self-characteristics, nothing being found as far as any true existence in phenomena or consciousness whatsoever. And that is the final view. That is the absolute view. Not to say that for example, what the middle way school or the mind-only school and what the lower Madhyamakas posit is wrong. It's not that it's wrong, it's just that it's not fully refined yet. There are points of the view that have not been most subtly refined. And so Mark, did this answer? I know that I didn't have a chance to ask your exact full question, so tell me.
I think it's really interesting that Geshe-la pretty much answered it for me, but to add to that question, it seems like, so Amit Goswami, who is the particle physics professor emeritus of particle physics at the Oregon State University, has a book called Awakened Universe, Self-Aware Universe. And in it, he says that at this point in quantum physics, the quantum physics camps are split in two. One is material realism, and the other is monistic idealism, which seems to fall very much in with Prasangika Swatantrika and Madhyamaka Swatantrika and Prasangika, the two split views. That, like Geshe-la is saying, that until you get to Prasangika, there is a lessening and lessening of finding self-nature, finding inherent existence. That Swatantrika still posits some inherent nature, whereas Prasangika says there's absolutely none, not a shred. So that's basically where he's getting at. This question that I have to tie that together is that definition for mind only sounds like where quantum physicists are at with this idea of monistic idealism. He says consciousness is everywhere, and it's in two phases. There's the phase local consciousness, which is me, and non-local consciousness is the environment which I'm projecting. So there seems to be this curtain between what we would call local versus non-local. Maybe that's the skin.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if Geshe-la sees that as a measurable evidence within mind only that quantum physics is getting to where Buddhism is.
Mm-hmm. Ani tensangi dutren seniba yang ani tawa pena quantum physics la ani tawa dremendo yore ani yewa ani so ni yore ani dene lower and higher pena dinangshin ani dene chikla ani shepadi ani natso di yugi shepadi kasakala yore ani yunayang ani dela yewa dets yore pena nangi shepa pena gangzak ki shepa dang chilola gi shepa pena di chuni pelcher ani chuni rangjin yimpa ani yabadra nga ani hakoma song yunayang marki triwadire Tengsangi tsenipa ki tawa pelcher dene nyeru ani uma taljorwa ki tawa ani lepki ani yogire.
Tanda
계란기.
khaburo, mathanjo tanda khabure. Tanda
음,
tanda sedul riparwa, condenses sedul ripala. Sensambasa. Wa namje. All my phone less me kashay. Patang. Tanda karsa. Sedul riparwa. Sedul ripage physics, the content physics. Zulten ba change digala konzo karla gar tanda sensamba da pet ta nibor sensamba ta dere che torundona najor chobu umarangi bada che taburai chaya lebu gore te khabore karzana tanda kozu ship yulden joje gi shepade wangshi kyangkyang maso ilu topa tandung chirlu pala ra karsa chiri pala tanda ilu topa kangla chepeche tubu amare wangshi kyangkyang re karsa joje gi lode wangshi kyangkyang la jagdwa tanda sensamba ina ilu topa zu chiruma tome wangshi gangni jagu gore
아니 수 되디어래?
zu joje gi lode tome wangshi tome topa ishi jagu gore ilu topa de
조제기
zu joje zu ta di zu re de pe zu jinje gi sheba jiorwa
올라서.
ilu topa de jagu gore tanda sedu ripage wangshi kyangkyang la ma zu zu sara go mar tere 다 이나 아마 돌아 시다 야르 침바래 다 칼레 다 타녀르노나 나저주부 말한 게 율무는 매바데 배 네바 야부지 뎀버 마투바데 네바 야부지 녜나 나저주부 말한 게 바다 타녀부 차그래 데려와 채요래
Tena consulti Mickey Wong Matok ani
또 왕비 셰바마도 이기 셰발라 또동 콘소 제바제 두고 말해 다 인규 단 저제기 로데 이기 셰바들 모두 왕시 말와 문지 미시기 미시 시디가라 왕시 작도와 때양 네바당인데 일로도 받쳐되어와 니오 냠바데 어때서 개발 망벌 다때서 시고에도 배 깨쳐버려 다때 낭비 중데 배 잡쇼를 차되어래 된자마다 배 다녀버리지 여름 순구도
So at this point where they are within physics and in in quantum physics, they are closer right now to the Chittamatra or mind-only school. And if they continue to make progress and breakthroughs and have new revelations and observations, then they would be entering into the domain of that lower the Sautantrika Madhyamaka, the lower Madhyamaka school. But they're not there yet. And this is what they are able to observe through that level of scientific observation. They are at the point where they are refining the knowledge and understanding the knowledge only at the point where the sense faculty itself has a relationship to the object. So they only identify, for example, that the eye faculty, the eye consciousness, the eye faculty sees an object, or the ear, the inner workings of the ear and how sound is perceived by the ear. But through their scientific observation, where they are right now, it's solely the ear or solely the eye. They don't yet have the understanding of how the mental consciousness is also involved in this process. So there's the original moment where the sense faculty meets with its outer object. It meets with that sight or that sound. But then the mind consciousness comes into play that says, oh, there is that, such and such form out there, or there was that sound. The mental consciousness is involved. And so they need to make that leap into understanding where the mental consciousness, our stream of consciousness, of mental consciousness is involved. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when His Holiness speaks about how, where modern day science, physics, and so forth are, it says that they're at a level of the mind-only school. And Geshe-la added that the Prasangika Madhyamaka view is so high, it is extremely refined, it is extremely profound view, philosophical view.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
May I ask a follow-up?
Yes. Yes, you may go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'm sure if you guys heard me. So I want to understand, does Madhyamaka deny the mind-only concept that there are no other objects, or does it incorporate it into the idea that it's trying to present that objects don't exist from their own side? Do you understand what I mean?
I do.
Does it, yeah, okay. I don't want to expand on it because I just want to keep it simple.
I think, Ani uma taljorwagi drupta de denso pena sem sambagi tawadi dene zug denso ani chirola ani yomare dergiore ani dela ani uma taljorwa ani kelengi yona amena ani geki yona.
Tati umatangu te kagire. Umatangu wa chidun dogurwa. Dogure te senzamba tangu wa ni ta oni toyong gore taso mampu tangure. Tindi galang oh shari te kapla oni toyong gore tato mampu yongure te.
Laso dene chirola gi yul di umatangu
umatangu chidun dogure.
Chirola ani
oh yul chirolio ba dogure.
Yeah.
Te oni toyong gore. 제산 또 우마탕교를 타와 야보 시나테니 오밀 타와테 졸라 균 갈가리요 바데 따투라 티페 미시베 케침보르 그상에 중망부테 제데 오테 투고레
라소
대조 양니안도 삼당과데 벤네 쳔보레.
So the Prasangika Madhyamakas do not deny outer objects, so therefore they do not refute that there are outer objects. Actually, they do assert outer objects. It is how they are existing that we find differences in, but they accept that the objects that are being apprehended are outer, external, out there. So they do not negate that view of the mind only. However, when you understand like the subtle points or the points within each of the tenet systems, what it helps you to do, for example, when when Geshe-la said your very question will be answered and is going to be, actually we're approaching that material in the text. He said it's coming, but what is like the value in understanding all the different points of all the different tenet systems is when you come to a new assertion, you can see what and understand what is being negated in a lower school. So you have to understand the lower schools to know what the upper schools are negating. And more of that is coming.
Tatupe 제다 내가 첨부할 되게 되고 배 둔대기 따와대 배 춘춘지 나가서 쉬고야 배 미스게 첨부다 내 첨부리.
Even, when we're talking about this, like world view, like the view of how things exist, what is the reality? It is expounded in the different tenet systems and brought as we go into the higher systems to more refinement, where we find that even a small point is really something that is a vital point. So it can be a very, very simple thing, like a simply expressed, very vital.
도대 바제서 제다마 도대 바 센잠바 도대 주부 우마랑기 바 나저 주부 우마랑기 바 대저 그배 두다 샤는가 삼롱망보시다 리베 제바체네 오 쿠란조 로라 파페 디케바테게 디 로라 파메 아니 딜리 사페 리바 야진 로사 민도 세데 텐디질라 콘세 탑 두밤 탐치기어와 디리 세데 딘디가라 나주 때 나중다에 땐자와니요 말때 간디스 삼탄도 간디스 공부진도 개바티기디 너 개바티기디길래 니니자고 유진 가른도 간디스 공부진도 간디스 삼탄샤도 때 삼탄 거로와 그래서 레라버지 때배 개바 첨버다 레라버지 말아 아주 레빠기 레라버 녀비하지 말해 그래서 공부제다데 나중 준다요 말다 그래서 마음부지게 우마 던져 따와 세나지 오마들 뺐다가 나중 단샤도 디 선잠베 디자다 마이르즈 나중 당은 망보여라 제 다산에 요래 디땅에 땐 자원이 말했어 쉬우지 딩기 공바 쉬우지 지니 담지기 요래 레로버 땐 자원이 말해
고수 야메나 나츠
나란츠 맞아 답에 맞아다 우마 던기를 따와대 시부 통보는 돈도 전에 선담벨 따와다 대조 나중 단거라 좀 나중 단된 자원이 말해 대조 배 개바되게 돼할 레비 공부제네 아니 순샤겨지러와 디제 하고에나 되니 오마오메 타와 코메틱 숭도아 tumta saben deora omel tawa omel tawa kometila tanga chu kenza jagena kenza oma manja gang leo marwa omel tawa shigi na tini senjam jira mel tawa ya bo shishena dodebel tawa shela shu projigore dodebel tawa shena yanda baji dodebel tawa chima chijinji shebaina senjam tawa shela shidagi pendo yongore senjambe tawa shena 아니 나저주부 우마랑기 빌 타와시야라 빼 펜토 첨부 온 거래 나저주부 우마랑기 다다 우마랑기 빌 타와 야부지 셴나 되니 모탕기 빌 타와시야라 펜토 온 거래 tumte 자베나 오마 오밀 타와 코메텍 수레 tumta 린진 타웨나 tumta 오마라 초두주네 tumta 공마라 초두주 오마라 당어미 자오 스숭요래
카레라스
tumta 린진 타웨나 공마 뚝딱 공말로 쳐도 죽네. 뚝딱 공마다 약속해서 배 시부지 통보제네. 요말라 당선 끼기요 말했어. 요말 시나 공마 시야를 펜도 용그리스. tumtar 인제 타면에 뜻숭어래. 어떤 가서 뒤배 시구다. tumtar 인제 타마데 시 도스로지 tum디 개버데 시나 시부 펜도 열다.
And so these four tenets that we're discussing are the Vaibhashika, Sautantrika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamaka. And again, two distinctions, two divisions of the Madhyamaka, the lower and the upper. And So we have to understand that their assertions, that which they claim when they expound their views, has, for each of the tenets, has come about through a great deal of intellectual scrutiny, investigation, and practice, and really some very, very focused, concerted efforts to find the underlying mode of reality. And what they then posited is what they found, what dawned on them, what did they find? And then they assert it as thus, say, oh, this is what our conclusion, and this is what we assert. And each one of the schools has done this through, greater refinement as we move up to the higher level schools. And so it has taken some of the past's greatest masters to come to these logical conclusions and ascertainments. And therefore, for us to learn them, so then they have then set out to make logical statements of reasoning and logic, to say it's like this because of that. It's not like this because of that. And so many points of reasoning that for us to study them, to come to the same understanding that they have concluded through great mastery, is not going to be easy for us. But this is the way we do it. We study all of the schools. What do the Vaibhashikas say? Well, then how do the Sautantrikas come along and say, oh, it's not exactly like that, it's like this? And so we actually incorporate and utilize all of that information. We shouldn't be tossing out, for example, when a higher school comes along, or a higher viewpoint comes along and invalidates an earlier point, we don't throw it out. We still need to understand it, and we have to understand why it's not valid. And then that supports our understanding of that, this next higher point or refinement that we are now studying. So it has taken the great past masters under, their mastery and intellectual scrutiny and reasoning and logic, these great logicians, they came to these incredible points, and they have value to study, even though they are invalidated and reissued in a new way. We don't throw them out. The tenet systems and the study of the tenets acts as an infrastructure, like stepping stones. We step on one, it is our support. We gather that support and information, and we move to the next, one by one by one, like moving, upstairs. And each one that we stand on is the root of our support at that time. And then we need to, in order to ascend a staircase, we need to start on, the lower stair, or the foundational level, and then move up the staircase. And it really does work like that. When you study Vaibhashika philosophy and its points and reasoning, this sets you up perfectly to then begin to study Sautantrika. Studying Sautantrika and understanding it just as it is, really precisely, sets you up perfectly to now understand the middle way view, and the middle way view that will say, oh, it's not like that, it's like this. And then when we enter the Sautantrika Madhyamaka and understand it again, it brings us straight to the highest, to the Prasangika Madhyamaka view, where we have now a really solid understanding and have walked all of those steps. And if you can refer to the jewel, sorry, sometimes I forget in English, the jewel garland. So if you read the jewel garland, in the jewel garland, when it talks about the lower tenet system, it actually calls them the most supreme. The most supreme views are the lower views that lead you up to that top of the staircase. And it says actually they're supreme, those lower, the lower traditions and systems, because they really help you to understand. And also within that text, it says, therefore, we should not toss them out. We should not put them down. We should know the great importance of a foundational level of base knowledge, of rudimentary understanding, of rudimentary. It's really a great, great asset. It says there in that text. And so please turn to that text and read it, because it's very, very beneficial. There are many points that we're involved with here that are within the jewel garland.
Yeah, that. Didn't do a lot of also, because I have the man push ticket later. That because I didn't do a lot. Carsorry. Because I'm among a take a Junzen ticket down. Take it like than Uma Tangu Tawadela. Never do sometime with a package. Roa. The have one nothing, Yoni. Yola, she wish Salga Chagri, the mother cover it. So, Nengat and Dill Lady Ota. Tan do the pattern Zopatoya. Then it sends some badang into Zopatoya. That take it the Ungore. The Yola sends them a Rajimen match how to go to the Zopatotanji. Do the bit Tilagora, do the pe Karela Goran, do the person, do the pe. Pagini, you win Matuna, Conjo Mashibi, Joshi Gomarwa. You win Yobatar, Rangi, Tonga Tagaran, you win Yobala, Jagorwa. Tim, Zembar Matuzeta, Tim losing in Juguar, do the Bala? Jaza? You also Tonga and Miduzana, Karla Gores.
Di Dodepa Gitawa, young
Dodepa, Ranzen and Muputunjiro, Ranzen Sidigala. You win to what to Gurua. Tondam Dembadon, Opotana, Tondam Dembazana, Dijiki Chizana, Chipachikan on the Vilula. Chazam the Devil Tawam, Tizu Chigmashina, they need to put Satan to Shigmarwa. Chaza Ta Umawe, oh, Dembar Matu Siade. Nitilagumetas. Pagin Tongan Miduzel Lago Martas. Tongan Miduzel Lago Martas. Zember me Sedugala Tongan Najinji or Marcella Goris. Tonajinji, Tonajinji, Hila Mateba, a new two to the Vajinato Tongore, two to your Maris. Tiny to your mother, two to your Marcella Gado. Tiny Zamji, the other Kazan and Tiny the two said as Ni Kurimba. What is all they kept as a shiver? He didn't Hagure.
And so all of these, Geshe-la said that in these last several weeks, all of these points that he has been emphasizing, many authoritative scriptural supports have been sent out and we've discussed them. And you should really rely on those. You should really, lean on those to support you and guide you to continue to further your zeroing in on that view of starting there at the top with this Prasangika Madhyamaka. Really use those quotes and those different points that we've been discussing. And so reasoning, understanding logical reasoning and these points in and valid reasoning is very, very important. And because what they do for us is they succinctly guide us to use our own analytical mind, which we have to personally do. We have to personally do the work to come to the personal conclusion, to really understand it personally. And so to understand, for example, one of the last points in the Way of the Bodhisattva, one of the root verses spoke of the tenets, for example, the prasangikas that were debating with the lower schools and debating their points. And so to go back and think about what are they debating there? Well, when we talk about the in the Vaibhashikas, they're still finding some objective nature, some objective characteristic nature in the outer object. And so we find out as we go on and study the other schools that the other schools negate any real intrinsic existence, in that there's any objective reality to things. And then in the Sautantrikas say that, okay, well, if something is not truly existent, then we've got nothing to talk about. They take it off the table. It's not existent at all. Then it never was. And so that we find out as well later is a point that is negated. And as well within that system, the Sautantrika system, when they talk about the two truths, they say that which is ultimate truth is that which is compounded phenomena. And again, later on, we find out that that is negated. So we had those earlier schools when we were talking about the two truths and what was relative truth and what was ultimate truth and so forth, when we discussed about that. And so when we get to then the prasangikas, so again in this debate, the prasangikas say that there is no true, substantial, self-sufficient existing thing out there, independently existing on its own. But they don't say that there's nothing to see, that there's nothing to look at, that there's no appearance. They don't say that. But what they say is that it is not like it is not like it appears to be. It's not like it seems, like it's seeming to be. It is not like we see it to be. We see it as something independent and self-sufficient, and intrinsic-ness of what it is, some selfness, some independent existence. And the Prasangika is saying there's not that, but there is something to see. And so when we understand what each of these four, and we've discussed what the mind only also, earlier we discussed what the mind only felt, in terms of those objects and mind that is perceiving it. So these are very, very important points to know and to understand all of this reasoning.
Yeah. Those break.
Okay, so maybe we take a little bit of a break here. Shall we take a 5 or 10 minute break, everyone?
Hey, Diane.
Mhm.
I sent something on chat just a second ago to everyone. I think it's what Geshe-la was saying. And I think this comes from Dorepa, the Swatantrika. Ask him if that's a definition belonging to Swatantrika.
The second one here, all right, it's small, so I'm gonna pull my computer in. Ani rankya tupe.
Yugi.
Okay, J Yuki Drupe Dakmepa. Rangyu.
Ze.
J. Okay, J. Yeah, Rankya tupe. J Yuki Drupe Dakmepa. Ani dene di kare la jagore di dodepa kitawa la jagore kare la jagore.
kansa dame shigor kansa dame dala rankya to be kansa rankya to be zegi dame pat lagrete kansa dame reta
Ani sugitawa dodepa.
kansa ka dame
Oh, just okay.
sugi dame dodebin dugu mare sugi dame sanjam bayenje mada sugi dame dugu mare te dame tharagi kaje shigor.
Okay, so this is one of the finer points that come into understanding the lack of like self-existence of the individual. So we have like, or the emptiness of self, of there being any self and an individual, and this is one of the finer points. And Geshe-la was saying that the Sautantrikas, while they assert and accept the lack of a self in an individual, they do not accept selflessness of phenomena, only selflessness of the person.
Okay, thank you.
kansa ka dame dala rakpa dan thamuni yorwa rakpa de kansa kizu sumdengi dame padre tati chita moen de gore ta kansa rankya to be zegi dame pade ta thamodre ta dela kebra je ji ni jorda pumbole akarsa that yor dati kansa rankya to be zegi dame pade dame thamodre
Lasso. Ani dene rankya tup ani sana.
Rankya to be kansa rankya sitigala be rankya sitigala jenla to mo wa tutup to yogenzo ji ngaranzo nga sitigala chik jenla to ba mebaje chik yobaji gogudo yungudo oh tati ngazo rankya to be zegi date chargo de inju
Lasso. Okay.
ti chargo ti yo marla gor tenda wa ti yo marla gor
Lasso. And so when we examine, so I don't know, I guess, are people still here? I'll just say what Geshe-la is saying because I know Mark is listening anyways. Are you there, Mark? Okay, yeah, I'm on a different screen where I don't see who's here yet. So when we examine the lack of like a self of a person, there are both the like the coarse points and the more subtle points of examination. And so, for example, when we are talking about the Sautantrikas, when they look at the grosser points, then they say that an individual must have like three distinctions. They look at three different distinctions where they examine through these three different distinctions and eliminate the self of a person. But the point, the line that you put up in the chat falls into the Vaibhashika's or the Sautantrika's more subtle examination, when they have a subtler or more refined examination into whether there is like any like any person, any real self? Is there any real person? And of course, they examine the aggregates, but also this point here, what it means, and maybe you know this already, but I asked Geshe-la to explain it to me. This beginning, this Rankya Tupedze. So Rankya meaning something that is self-perpetuating, something that is like a standalone by itself. So that it's like, if it looks like mark, there's markness. So it must come into being like without dependence on anything else. There is a like markness that exists in and of itself. It just jumps into being just like that. It didn't need to depend on anything else. So it is kind of self-sustaining, self-substantial, and that's what they're negating. They are saying there is not that. And that's one of the proofs of the lack of, or their negation of their being. Like, I guess we identify with our names. So I could use, my name, any real Diana. There is no, it didn't start out like that. Anyways, that's what Geshe-la had to say.
I understand. I really appreciate that. But I've got one small problem with this idea of substantial, self-substantial, Rankya-tupa. That if we're saying that the direct cause of this moment here is the very preceding millisecond prior to, or the moment just before, how is that not self-sustaining?
Mm-hmm. When we're talking about a moment of time?
Yeah, so let's say that the mark in this very millisecond right now is directly caused by the mark in the millisecond just before. How is the millisecond just before not some form of self-sustaining, self-substantiating thing?
Okay, I will try.
Where's the absence of self-substantiality? Does that make sense?
Kong dela ani kandashia chikyer ani dindreyana pena disungito di tanda dantarangi mark seriadegi gu di kechik di karchak nguma ki mark re marbe pena dantarangi
kecheji yude tende jagiona nga charyong dugala yen la matebo cherudo wang yurbabo to chutu rawang mo to ji chergudo chertu del samdang gorwa.
Okay,
keche yude ma keche yu pe tende ki chepa chigo mardanda nga chertu del samdang nga sedugala chik 가르소래 추도 추지선이죠 송도 송변선은 왕 유럽보다지 배 태고르지 차낭지 레기도 어때라고래.
okay,
철줄들 삼당고 와래.
okay. Lasso. Di yang ani trisong pena ani di kechik di marki kechiki gyu di marki ngoma ani kechiki ngoma dine how to call it
뒤로와 마 자야데 계제 유다 계산마데 드링 계제 유 잡아라
dine kasang
마트마데 닝구 마 계제 유 잡아라 땡 ngăci 원게 던디 잡아라 대다 유 잡아라마다 띠마라 땅 좀 nga 철줄지도 nga 철줄지 다 철줄들라 아니 배 왕 유르바보다 저 추투브 소리지 nga서 배 택보 생부르지 차라리 레기도 철줄들 좀다 nga 가자 랑캬 시드가라 랑캬 시데 디 철줄 때는 삼당 거래.
Laso dene di ani ngoma di kasangi marki gyu di rankya nanshinre. Di rankya yempa
대다이 랑켜 인과예요 말아.
kongi chiwa
단다
dire.
랑켜 세디가라 맞주 철줄 때라. 나 이제 철줄 때는 삼당 거래.
Oh, laso. Yeah.
कि मैं के दे के 시기셔요 말대. 나 간디스 철기도 철줄데 삼당다. 총본대기 총본대인데 총기 육자들 왕 규르고로 와. 총기 총소 잘라들라 총본대기 왕 규르고로 와. 디전이니 나 시데 나랑저 풍불로 왕 규르법을 저 풍불로 배 다도 징은 소리지 철기도. 어때 랑켜의 철줄이 차디었다. 추지데 추라 왕 규르고로 와. 추야만 로마 추지기 떼기로 와. 제가 추도 추지 타부 철줄다. 총도 총본 타부 철줄이 열다. 마 철줄데라. 제가 아주 철줄데를 삼당 거다. 나랑저 나 철윤데가라 나랑저 붕볼라 왕 규르법도 철기도 와. 상상지. 나좀 고나디가라 나나 손라거를 나도 고인 존지 힘도 존지 철기도 와. 셈마기데 나 셈기부 미드즈라 셈데가 힘도 존지 철기도 와. 상상지. 오 철줄데를 삽거. 랑캬와 시디가라 그렇게 전에 뜨밤에봐 그렇게 와서지 왕 규르법을지 철거래.
And so here in this quote that you sent that translates as there being no, let me pull it back up, there being no self-sustaining, self-sufficient, existing self. What we need to understand from this quote is when we say I, the moment we say I, we have already established the infrastructure of a duality. There is my perspective, and there is everything outside of my perspective, and we call it other. As soon as we say I, we have created this idea of a division. And actually, we also feel like there's some autonomy to our side, that there is this individual, there is this this one who is in power and in control. And this is what we're talking about. This does not exist. This does not come from a moment like it before or something like it before or self-sustaining. This is a creation. And as soon as there is something like, if we apprehend something in a way where we say, I am seeing this form, all of a sudden we impute some power and some separateness and an orientation. We create an orientation, and we call this my, we call this I. And so this I, we then have to find a place for it. We associate it with our aggregates. So we associate it with our aggregates. And now there is, where is the I? So I am walking. I have a headache. I don't feel so good right now. And so, my head hurts. And this is what is being spoken about as not being established or self-existent or self-sustaining it's this I that we have created that experiences these things. So this I and other. And Geshe-la said that's where the focus of this lack of substantiality comes from. So also meaning that it's not dependent on anything else. So the moment, we say that, I, for example, I'm going to buy something, there's business, there's something to be bought, and there's the person buying it. So there are automatically, we create this relativity. And so this I is relative to all other things. And so that's what's being negated here, that there's not this individual self that does not depend on anything else whatsoever, that is not relative to anything else whatsoever.
So, 풍부 ngade longcho jazanje ngado longcho babuzuri charuda jazan tendi longcho babuzuri krikangwaji nga charjulde tena jinjiyo mare lagorta rang kansa rangkhat tu zegi dame sidgala tena jinji charna jinjiyo mare jazan diorda jermuchidang jirmuchi lama tau zo jirmuchu pedi jusa sake lama jiore kar khonsende kar jizun rendawa kansa ge da khelingo re jirmuchi kansa ge da khelingo mare ta jirmuchi kansa ka da ke milenze de kansa ka date tanda nga shang jing to chergido semna phumbo de wang guru gyucha zonji nga de wang guru bo zonji sheng ji nga zo semle legdo tena shinji yo mare labre tede me labre jizu ne da kansa ka da khelenze da date ni gewa chena nga sang gigre ni dipa chena nga dungal nyongri nga dua data nga zedi o tinda we nga de yorwa yone tinda we nga de gi gewa chena eni sangye yore ti nga sheng di nga zo semne churju pumbu wang gyurba bu ji chegmi date jasanting nga churjul de samdang gor so o tinda we ni gewa tumna 젬펜잖아 nga sonam sagre ti sana ni eni be jena tonda jana eni sangi grisedi dindo ngade jizunado nga ye seyade dati dindo ngade jirmo nga mesi ngade nga ranzo wang gyurba pura jinji kumbodo wang gyurja ngade wang gyurba boje shengji chergdo o tezonji melare tita mazu ti sheng digi garchi gore mazo dungal ki tsawa jingi gore eni jeli kesi che de tin yung gore te mezi wade gizen chbo gore charsul de samdang gorda ti chembor da kebar pe chembor tengila.
And so let's spend a little more time identifying the self within the person that's being negated here. And so let's just look at this, and as well, look at this term, I or me or self. And so we have 5 aggregates. So the aggregates are multiple. There's a multiplicity. And yet, when we're going about something, we say, I am taking part in this game. I am enjoying this movie. or I love this new flavor of tea. We say I, like there is one, whereas there are actually 5 aggregates. And it's this idea of this autonomous, independent, this singular personness, this selfness that we identify with. We really identify strongly that there is something in power and autonomous and independent called this I that is taking part in life, experiences, and so forth. But Tsongkhapa had a teacher, and one of his teachers who was called Jetsun Rindawa. And so Jetsun Rindawa, he accepted a self. He accepted the notion of an I, of a self. However, Tsongkhapa did not accept this notion of a self. But actually, what Tsongkhapa did not accept was this autonomous, independent, acting self of an individual. He did not accept this one that we actually spoke about in this quote that went up in the chat, this independent, self-sustaining, substantial self. And this is what Tsongkhapa himself did not accept. And the self that Jetsun Rindawa, his teacher, did accept was the self that says, that aspires, I will engage in virtue so that I accomplish merit, accumulate merit, and I become enlightened. May I become a Buddha. So this is the self. This I will engage in the purpose and benefit of others, because if I create virtue, then I will amass merit. If I amass merit and work towards pleasing and helping others, then I will be brought to enlightenment. So we can see the difference in these two I's. This self that Tsongkhapa refuted and denied and did not accept is this self that takes an orientation in life experiences that brings about suffering, suffering circumstances. That is the self that Tsongkhapa denied. So there's a difference between these two.
라당나다 가서 숨 던지세데 니 개왔잖아 나상기 그리신디 티지는 뭐지 켈링 그러와 나 메즈다 다데 지르무치 티 틸은 주고 말해 나 메즈다 다데 상페 따티 푸푸들라 너지 슈 총보 영엔지 다 지르도 왕 규바보 풍부응데 왕 규자지 그배 나데 왕 규바보 데 간지 nganzin shu rangzin rangzin shu chumbu yongin ngaji redoa hajar te lang nganz rangzin shu chumbu yobe gyaje dambare endo wang gyurba bodo tenda ngade yizun tenda ban dogu mare kaje nga se dela kebringi chegodo achite toso gewi chola kha chogne yempen cheginji 지데 배 랑진지 슈슈 모여는지다 개개다 베제르다 민두다 나라 섬다나 단다 지르무지기 답에 가사가 다메 시야데 다 둔데나 가사가 다메 시야데 다데 왕 규르바버드 나진 슈슈 모 랑진지 슈슈 모여는지 배 덴디지 생생이 나지라 문진지고 보아래 네 섬다나 덴디지리 다티기 미게 강가탕 거다. 동안 잡아진 거다.
So it's really important that that we understand what's being said here. When we have this concept, this like a generic image of I or me, you know, what pops into our head when we say I, you know, am enjoying this movie, I am, you know, oh, I, you know, love when this happens or don't enjoy when that happens. There's this impression, this generic image in our head of this one, this me, this one who has rights to do this one who is in control, and one who has an agenda. This one, this I, this me, is the one that brings about difficulties and acts out of self-interest and feels the need to control and be reactive and so forth. This is one of the categories of this I, me. This is the one who is very caught up in ego and achieving agenda. And this is often the I that we associate with and that we orient from. And then, and again, this is the I that was being refuted and denied by Jetsun Kappa, Master Jetsun Kappa. And then there is this individual who is going to act in the altruistic way for the benefit of all beings. When we say, then I will take this body and engage in action for the benefit of beings. I will be in service to benefit, you know, all beings. This is the different I. This is the, you know, this is a very different orientation where we can use the word I. When we talk about a lack or emptiness of self, of there being no self, or the realization of, we have the realization of the emptiness of phenomena or of the emptiness of person. When we realize the emptiness of the person, this is we're realizing the emptiness of the very one that Jetsun Kappa negated, of there being an individual that is part of this psychophysical structure that is autonomous and named this and exactly like this. That's what it is empty of. That is what is empty when we talk of emptiness of the person. That is what is empty of, actually. When we, of there being any real autonomous self like that, any realness to that. However, when we act out of the impression of this and identifying with this is identifying with a kind of self that gets involved in a lot of non-virtue and is the very root or the seed of suffering, of our suffering. So it's important to kind of parse out these two. Did that make sense to people? Can people see the difference between these two?
Yeah, so it's like
I was asking.
So it's like the difference between being caught up in your karmic actions versus being able to see the view of being able to recognize the view of karma in action rather than being caught up in participating in it with no awareness of that.
Mm-hmm. Ani pauche ani didang drelwa rubegeshila pena ani chokchikla di nga di dagzingi nga di legi lung ki wangi ani parso ani droken yamana ani di nga shenda pena nga simchinla ani pensam kegi yin ani dene gewa ani drukiyin di gangzak di tawa hakokenre ani le gyumdre gi dralwa hakoken yin.
지들랑 अर्जिन शु छेयो बता 지들랑 अर्जिन शु छुयो बता केटे केता भरे अर्जिन कचो ची शु छु बता गाओ न्याम अर्जिन शु छु बो ये केंगे अनि ची जेला माथे बा खरिखां रावां वर्जी वां ग्रुपा बोडजी माथे छारिंग गोरो.
The big thing, and what we can say 100% about the difference between these views, so taking that all into account and kind of condensing it here, is that on the one hand, there is a great amount of self-identification, really identifying very strongly with a sense of self, a strong sense of ego and a strong sense of self. You know, I have rights, I am independent, I'm in control, a very strong sense of an I, and, you know, not realizing the interdependence of things, really feeling autonomous and independent and singular, rather than seeing the interdependence of things. So we could call that karma, but here Geshe-la has said seeing the interdependence of things. They don't see that. They feel very strongly, just a strong sense of self and independence.
그래서 갱 다 딘디 라이카토빈 제기 다디 가르치거든. 아니 다 미거 강가 장용구도 룽강 장용을 지차거도 다 된다와데 직왕 규법을 들지 된다와지 매와지 학과에나 되니 직 되는 왕 규법 된다와지 유교 자원인이 요마와 맨날 매 인상코 디 아카르소레 딘다웨 철줄데 현리에서 거와 어떻게 인도갈 철줄데라다 또또 알아서 나 시디가 나 철줄데라 삼당과래
아니 게실라트네 랑캬 투페
랑캬 시디가라 젤라 마티바 추투투 철줄지레 인구 랑캬와
맞어 드네 여나 아니 칸드레 아니 여나
된다지 여나 다 가르쳐보래 다된 된디지 그시 타바타주고 여서나 데 매와 또에 용역 매와데 케투마로 말와 되겠나 그럼 매비 경기때 철줄데 교임 인자 철줄데라네 삼단 철줄데 시투그로
And so
나 철줄데 삼단 거다 또 철줄데 나왕 규법버지 배 상생존지 맞어도 삼로 마다나 텐디지 홉대가 차량우다 맞서디가 상생존지 풍불라 마테베존지 다 삼들라 아니 풍부다 고나현데가라 아니 그 진부도 되는거다 나나기도 고나기도 라기도 고나도 고가 임베존지 또고다 이들가라 네 차줄데 생생데 페티디시기도
And so when someone is we've now come to another point that actually when we really get in there and start picking this apart and examining it, it's not as easy as it first appears. This is something that really takes a lot of thought and really like some inner reflection and some investigation. And so first of all, we look that, you know, if there were someone who is self-sustaining and exactly that thing, then, you know, for example, then like that self-absorbed individual that has this perspective of my and their and so forth, you know, let's say they were committing, someone like that were really just involved in a lot of negativity, just constantly only being involved in negativity. You know, that's one of the scenarios that happens from that kind of a mindset. You know, it's me and my and what I'm going to get, what I'm, you know, going to accomplish for me. Well, once you investigate into that and see that there really isn't anyone there like that, then we realize that doesn't really exist. And therefore, that individual that has realized that will stop looking to service that one in control, that autonomous me, that autonomous I. Will stop looking to get things to make that I happy. Will stop looking to service that I, that ego. And what happens is we break apart with that I need this and I want that. We break apart with it. We create a division. We break up with it. And, you know, that's what happens when we realize that that first kind of I, that very self-servicing and self-involved I, that it's not really there. It's something that, you know, is a notion, is a misguided notion. And I asked Geshe-la, then I asked further, then if a self-sustaining I were to exist, if it were to be really truly established, that there is this real like individual here, and he said, well, then we would not be able to examine it and tear it down and disprove it and invalidate it. The fact that we can invalidate it, the fact that we don't find it, that shows you that it's not there. If it were truly there, we would not be able to invalidate it. But Geshe-la said, think about it. You know, even when, you know, we say, oh, I have such a headache, my head really hurts. Where are we really pointing to? You know, we're pointing to our head. We're using this word I like there's some independent, you know, self-existent, autonomous person that it's happening to, but where do we point? We point to our head. It's our head that hurts. And that is, again, a hint to help us recognize that this autonomous, independent, singular individual does not exist.
So, Diane, I asked Geshe-la this question more than a decade ago. And at the time, I didn't put it into English well enough for Tenem to translate it to Geshe-la, and I don't think it made sense, but I think I can do it now, particularly since this topic is pretty fresh with us. When we're talking about the foundational masters of each of these worldviews, it would appear that we're talking about a supernatural, for all of us ordinary beings, a supernatural experience meditatively what direct perception is, and obviously the various qualities of that consciousness in direct perception. Okay, so my first question is it possible, I mean, is this what we would look at it as a supernatural? I saw Barb nodding. That it's almost supernatural. We're not talking about sitting there and listening to the birds or sitting there and thinking about a qualm. We're talking about a concentration that is so clear, stable, and intense that it's beyond ordinary people. And so that's something, you know, likened to the Aryas. And in fact, the Tariq text that I was reading in Dharamsala said that this is coming from the Arya masters. So question number one, is it possible to have a direct perception of each one of the individual skandhas, to have a direct perception of form, to have a direct perception of feeling, to have a direct perception of discrimination, and so on? And if that's the case, question number 2 would be, if
You mean for an ordinary being or for any being, even an Arya being, to
well,
have a direct perception, assuming an Arya being?
Assuming an Arya being.
Okay, yeah.
So not me, but let's say Vasubandhu, Dignaga, Dharmakirti, Asanga, Nagarjuna, and even include in that Balaviveka, Buddhapalita, and Chandakirti.
So could they have a direct perception of the
Each
skandhas?
individual skandha.
Each of the skandhas.
So if that's that part, that's part 1 of that question. And if so, being that there are 5 skandhas and there are 4 schools, but if we look at that 4th school as split between Swatantrika and Prasangika, making it basically a 5th school, is it possible that each of these various masters had their limitation was based on the direct perception of the skandha that they had? In other words, Barb's nodding. I think she agrees with this question. If Vasubandhu was limited to a direct perception of the form skandha, then his definition of reality accords with the characteristics of form. And likewise, Dharmakirti and Dignaga, as they had direct perception of the feeling skandha, it would seem that they're going a bit deeper and finding that lack of substantiality and so on. So is it possible that these 5 schools, I'm going to call them 5 schools rather than 4, these 5 worldviews accord to the direct perceptions of the skandhas? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Does anyone else? Barb's nodding, so I see she gets it. To me, that is a profound statement that if this is answerable, that we need to all just shut up and sit down and practice concentration.
Mm-hmm. Ani gesila ani dine drumta shigi ani dotsol di dela di pelcher di ngoma gi tsema gi kepa gi samlo tanya gi nupa ne chikpo kyang kyang le ani chungi yomare konser pena ngunsum di tope pena drachompe gi namsha ki nupa konso di topa ne dirtsel dirgi ore di pena samlotang ani samlotang chikpon ne ani chungi yomare di drupta jigi dirtsel di nam pena di drachampa gi nyamsha ki topa nangshin ani yurgire di rabe peno tata pena takche ya chikpo latene dirtsul di nangshin yongi yomare gomgyap ne yang topa ke nam nyam top kene
Ate rikpe chepache ne korona zo dupte nye pate kashi gorwa. Penna karsana rikpe chepache ne korona zo toba nye pate eni tenlam babne nga nye pate dindi jiresha di reshi de sungorwa.
Lasso.
Ta penna ngumbu ludubi na ludubi ta tawade ranjin mebel tawade najinji tanda cholang chota zu toyo marta cholang de chota zu ko ranjin mebel tawa toyo mare tede jubar under na pe salfo yore ani kuntana buchi ge jirmuchi dewaji jirmuchi topaji yore topatonde mazne ani tinala yore cholang tapa sogi kyang tingi mato mawa tsars cholang da chugi tapa tezu ne pe tongi mato bazde tongi to yomarela na 캔서부지 레스 수요래 오늘에 동이 던주인 더나 진짜 또요 말도 동이 고난조양 조술 마다마다 열와 밑에 동이 나타라 열와 가자 차라에 들어가라 던주인 더나 진지 동이 참아도 또요 말해 따디 가르소래 냠잘라 자나 간디진 미시 다디 냠자갈라타 고난조 둠디 셰줄데라 디 제바이나 차라 기 켜버다 이게 참말에 네 피상은 유선 노르가 말다 스타와 노르가 말 스타와 차라레스 차라가 켜버 캡텐덴데
Di chulam ki kola di yapogo chumasong chulam ki kola kare sompegesla
간디세
chulam
Tignaga.
초랑 초라기 주기 잡아
di sen
로빈 주기 잡아던 로빈 초기랑 버터서 우마베 셰벤 나진지 사와 타모도 또요 말했어 또요 말때 이게 저게단 말해 디데 또요 말제데 주바란델 나 페살보여로 다와타 빈 주바란델 나 살보여래
저 chikla ani toyo mare
우마 던주에 다와 타모도 또요 말해
laso
주기 잡아도 초기랑 버터서기
laso
따디 우마랑 유비 개병원 버터서기 또요 말와 우마 던주에 다와다다
Yeah, konso ani kare dirtsul di pena di chedramawa gi
따디 다와 락바 차거와 고난주 초랑 초라도 또 교대 락바 차디어래
laso di tawa rakpa de konso ani kane ani kien pare konso pena di rikpe ani
고난주 삼분다 릭비 째빠째는 얘기어와
laso yene gomgyap dang topa ne
다 곰 릭비 째빠째 삼분다 곰갑 리바째 누시는 게 뱅이 교지로와
okay
레라버시다 말해대
okay di triwa tangpore triwa ni padire ani tanda di drumta ani ji yorwa yena yang di omapa gitawa gi yewa ni yotsang
딩이 디레 우마 타와 타라레스 투다 지데 타와 라파레스 오멜 타와도 락바제 공 투다 고멜 타와도 타타 누구거래 타와 타라게 개버 차버레스
어디서 보도 얘나양 아니 탄다 di na pungponga okay druptaji yorwa 얘나양 umagi tawa dela ani yewa ni yotsang ani tawa
두세 이너더 멍부차 그래데 제다마올라 데바 줍게 요래 아니 도데발라 룽이 제단 도데바다 선점벤 리비제단 도데바 니 요래 아니 선점발라 타가나지 요르다 두스는 빼 멍부차 그래
okay last
아니 제요 말다 간지 뚝다 지게 타와데 타라레스
No mare.
타와 노르겨 마레스 타와 타라레스
laso dene pungponga ani yorwa pungponga ani pungpong okay ngaso pena drumta jinga so yempa chashana dene pena dodepa ki ngepa tokpa dang ngepa pena di pungpo chikla ani konso
따티 용구로와
toyaki
두스 용구로와 제마 삼루타 너데피 두달라 견들 타니 쳇 선삼베 에 둠달라베 네바nye 용두갈라 아니 너데피 두다 땅거와 너데피 두다 땅 아니 선삼베 타와데 베 양베 네바nyene 텔라 냠넨지고래 아니 텔라 냠넨지네 아니 가로 지니 따베 로데 하정 nyumung shu chung ru de lo de zang ru warwa zang ru de gala ani be senza me tutala kyun tane kyun tone ani naja jube umarangi ba yani dode jube umarangi be tuta surje yan chod thongore de chod thong gala senza me tuta tang dode be uma be tuta jugu war umarangi be tuta umarangi be tuta nanda pe ta zo umarangi be kar lagare ransenge tu wore number 2 ya mata ransen tu wore 조직이 시비 니소 구군이 조고레스 디시거와 텔레베 시락이 연된 통연데 에네 선자메 tun탈로다 우마랑기 투타 주고래 우마랑기 투탈레 시락이 네바녜네 디지도 갈딱 거로텔 견ton데 우마탕규 타와 네바녜네 우마탕규 타와 두스제네 에네 디니 상게 두스차거와 투타 오마오마니 두스제네 다 타도 땡큐를 따와 네바네바 두스 용거를 되더래 두다 오마탄에 고미 고마를 중에만 띠 용거를
Okay.
두다 지지 센잠바이나 센잠에 두다 따가라는 상계다 가버래
우리 아니 망체와 아니 도르두체나 공기트리와 페나 디 드럼타 드라멘다기 예와 디 퐁포 라
말 붕보가 개발해 말아 붕보는 강가 직발지기로 와 붕보 개발 말해 돼 따와 파기 철들고는 개발 차버려
오케이
딘디가라다 대기는 지선 두다 오마데라 그런 성만 거든 두다 오마를 견 동거를 권한죠 대양 답아 많이 버터네 대 락바임바 하고 거래 디 타데 니베 네바녜 거래 디레 차 네바녜 에네 다두 에네 우마탕규를 따와라 네바녜 거래
And so as for the first question, whether they're that which the different schools ascertained and then posited, did it come through intellectual examination, or was it more of a realization through practice? Geshe-la said that the way that their ascertainments came about was they began to really using the intellect, pick apart and really scrutinize, really through some detailed scrutiny and investigation, they would have realizations and things, understandings would be revealed to them, and they would come to certainties, and therefore they would say, oh, then it is like this. And you know, for example, you know, we have Master Nagarjuna who ascertained and asserted that the lack of any intrinsic existence, any true intrinsic nature in phenomena, for example. And this did come through a process. And, you know, the process actually was twofold. First of all, in all of the schools, and so in all of the schools, the way that these statements were made, that these philosophical worldviews were actually set out, was first through a great deal of intellectual scrutiny, but then so they learned, and then there is the process of self-reflection, so really reflecting on it, and then indeed brought into the meditation where this was really integrated, deeply integrated into personal experience, deep meditation experience. And then there so for example, there would be a practitioner, that someone that would practice the Sautantrika school, that would learn the philosophy of Sautantrika, self-reflect and practice it, and then what was being revealed to them through that practice, as their mind became clearer and their ability to perceive reality became clearer and clearer, then they would see that it's not like this, it's actually like that. And then the Sautantrika view was formed. Then someone would practice Sautantrika for a while, become clearer and clearer, and then see things that weren't seen before, and revelations and realizations. And then the mind-only school. Someone would practice the mind-only school, and then, move up to the lower Madhyamaka school, where there is still some kind of self-like characteristic in phenomena. There are still things being characterized, and then realize there is no intrinsic characteristics whatsoever. This is free from that. And then we have the higher school of Prasangika, fully liberated from like extremes and characteristics, and reach the point of that view. And so this did indeed come through, both investigating, but especially really using logic to investigate and to pick things apart and finding out where. So there was an intellectual process of, while practicing this, of finding where was the mark missed? Oh, this school missed the mark here, and it's really like this. So there was this intellectual investigative process going on that brought them to ascertainment. So ascertainments like realizations, deep, deep understandings. And what each of these worldviews are these ascertainments of the different level. And Geshe-la underlined the point when I brought in the question of, is this related to the views related to the aggregates, the 5 aggregates? And he said, first of all, if you want to talk about how many different tenet systems there are and how many views, actually within, I think it was 18 within Sautantrika. So Sautantrika has 18, and another school had 4 of this and several other of that. He said there are many, 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 many schools. Actually, we're just talking about the 4 major tenet systems. But within those tenet systems, so it's not like moving through, okay, the form and feeling and perception and so forth, or karmic formation. What's happening is it's moving through a sequence of things becoming more refined. So we start out with something that's very rudimentary and very rough. So there's a rough understanding, a rough infrastructure, and then that's refined even more and more and more. And so in some of that refinement, this is where the negations and things are being kind of like tossed out as not the, the absolute, true view or highest view. Geshe-la said it's more like that, not related to the aggregates.
So did you happen to ask him about, when I first started off, I said that there seems to be a supernatural aspect of direct perception at these higher levels. So is that true? Or are we talking about just being really doggone good at mental, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, come on, Mark. Mental laboratory. What's the word?
Analyzation and
it's just really doggone good at sitting still and analyzing things.
So Mark, could you define supernatural?
Beyond the ordinary being, like you and I sitting down and meditating, having a direct perception of the other side. so to speak.
What's the other side?
Exactly. I'm just,
Yeah, well, I didn't ask it exactly like that, but I did ask it in the way I thought it would be understood. Ani marki triwit ani dire pena dinguma di sema sema ki kepa denso di ngone ngonsu du tokpegi nupa yogere pena ngato so kebo nangjin yosamare di pe samlo tang semlo pe yapo tankin yosamare pena di ngunsu du ani tok yagi chadu pelcher konso di nupa shandaka ni yogire pena so kebo yogimare
Teta ngonsum sidigala wambe ngonsum yore rari ngonsum yore najur ngonsum yore ani tim ngonsum la mari wambe yore ta ngonsum la ri khaje yore wambe ngonsum sa nganzo bumba dante ju thongeda ngazo migi thonga tega chipe chikyan ma do khebare yo mare najur ngonsum sidi ta ngoni khebare chimbo cha bare tele najur ngonsum sidigala ta pe 팔람 톱도 마도 나중 무슨 톱이야 그럽니다.
tonglame
팔고 돌람 톱는데 나중 무슨 톱 그래. 나저 바시도 가라. 동용 무슨 또 오다. 그래서 로데 개발 첨버리더니. 디니다야 녀모 슈충루 충 녀모 가서 슈충루데 아니 세바살루 살루 또바토로 토르고 걸어와. 제대 개발이요. 나중 무슨나 지 차라기 개발이 요래 땡땡 요래
laso dene dekapsu pena di sema ki keba denso konso najorgi
요요 간진 딥제긴 디바데 가서 세븐 로치리 아니 셰 세마다 쓸로 도로
And so first of all, before I answer that, I forgot one part of the last point when Geshe-la was saying how systematically what the progress, how things were progressing was through finer, like refining. And along with that came, you know, a level like of experience with emptiness. And so you know, the perception of emptiness, so seeing directly into the true nature, seeing the lack or the emptiness of existence and so forth. Obvious, we can see within the views where some of the schools are still finding some existence, some objective existence in appearances and objects and so forth. We can see that emptiness has not yet been realized as it has been, for example, in the highest of prasangika view. So it is related to their view and their experience of the view of emptiness. Unless you have directly seen emptiness, you can't know the lack of intrinsic existence and so forth. So Geshe-la mentioned that. And here, Geshe-la mentions when you talk about like supernatural or like direct perception, when we're talking about direct perception, first of all, it's important to know that there are three major categories of direct perception. There is like the direct perception of the faculties. Then I want the ngonsum te tokpe tampo wangpergi.
원봉 원숨 되더래. 원봉 원숨 되는 가서 집에 지겨라. 유 통화 대가랑으로.
Then I nipa
원숨 달라 세마 이민이여래. 원숨 또 깨지 땅부터 세마래. 내 깨지 니바네 세마 말에 제시 자루 그래.
laso dene
원숨 세마 제바 세마.
shepa sama.
제바 세마.
Najor.
라리 원숨 열어. 원숨 달라 라리 원숨. 원봉 원숨 라리 원숨 나정 원숨래.
Okay, okay. And so there, the faculty direct perception, direct perception of self-awareness, and the yogic direct perception. And so we all have, you know, the direct perception of the faculties. For example, when, you know, we have an unencumbered or undefiled sense faculty that see, so for example, eyes that see something and see it just as it is, then that's direct perception right there. And that's within the scope of all of us ordinary beings. So we all have the opportunity to have that. But when it comes to yogic direct perception, this is, these are those who have reached the path of seeing, so have some degree of experiential realization where they have seen the path of direct, you know, of seeing, which is a direct perception of emptiness. And so, you know, when we talk about, you know, those past logicians and masters who, in some of them you named, who have made these philosophical statements, then indeed, you know, there are those that have reached the path of seeing. And, you know, these are realizations that they had directly that would fall under yogic direct perception, which again is not something that, you know, ordinary, you know, a level or a scope that the ordinary person could see. This is having directly seen emptiness. And what we understand for these practitioners and these past masters that, so for example, when, and Geshe-la also said there are different degrees of seeing emptiness, and that's why we have different degrees of views until it's completely refined in Prasangika. But once we see emptiness, the negative emotions decrease. They naturally decrease and diminish. When we have a decrease in afflicting and destructive emotions in our mind, then mind naturally becomes clearer. It becomes more knowing. And so it has this ability of more knowing, clearer knowing. And furthermore, when negativities, when we separate ourselves from being involved in negativity, again, the mind clarifies, it becomes clearer and clearer. And so we have this ability for yogic direct perception to see into the truth of reality. So I think that got closer to your
much
question.
closer. That actually got much closer. But so now what it feels like is that if the parts are all adding up, but we're still not coming to the same sum, because as much as I love Tibetan-minded people, whether they be from Tibet, Ladakh, or Bhutan, if you don't ask the question exactly right, you don't get the answer. So this question, to narrow it down a little bit, and by the way, you said 3 direct perceivers. There are 4. We forgot mental direct perceivers.
There are 4. Oh, so, okay, so there's Wangpo, Rangrik.
Now, Joe.
아니, 지요를 빼 숨요를.
이경은 지열에다 이경은 숨여러 가지고 이왕여러 와. 이경은 숨. 다때 나네 나중은 숨들랑 아주 가르쳐 거래. 통놈 톰네 옴람라 부디 딱 옴람라 옴람즈디 딱 통놈들이 사당부터 걸어 와. 다 링이 원도잖아. 다 사둠바니 예바츠바 dumpa portu nyomong pangero nyonti cho pangore cheda nyonti phayon gala najrung sumda nyonti ma shu chung ro de ko saru ndugro sa yepani shiti pang go zum nyonti pansare shiti pangor shijindiba shijindiba de sajubala thotangi jede thome parchemelam portu Panja Pandu, Tidi Porto, and it's Salton Royova. Shepade.
Sagupane.
Oh, Kanji
Tachupatu.
Taking Diva Katsuchi Pangiri, Shepade, no Salton Water, Najong Rimba Bampur, Najong Sumla, Rimba Yore, Yoncho Ere, Dipin Divid Kengi. Ta say. Saju thame ishe parche melam tapa karsore shiti thame thamu pawadang ti pawe tango thoba ni sangje pa tingem re didi tapa 남켄성이 톱송었다. 나중은 숨데 남켄을 포송래.
Sachupagi Tama.
타마
Tama.
시집 충충 빵에 parchim namrulam segorata par namrulam zanata pampa thobadang sangye ba tinyamrata shitip chung dibanan taso de pangor di pande tango tape gopa thobadang sangye tinyamrata ne nam di gi kembadal namken labre
Oh, lasso.
남켄 시디가라 이베 빙이치 저도 시고 뒤숨 ken거래 베 시자 말루바 시고래 딥지긴 디바제서로와 시자 셰발라 퍼도 쪽인데 에 시티 들어와 시티 참고 판서도 시자 셰발라 퍼도 쪽에 메인드고 코스브 세견 차zon르다 din 남켄 제 미밍데 나중은 숨들 남켄 민다다래
So yes, so there were 4. So if anyone was recording those or writing those down, then the 4th one is mental direct perception. So we have those 4.
So can you again go, it's the direct perception of faculties, the direct perception of self-awareness,
Yogic.
The direct perception of yogic self-awareness.
Or yogic direct perception.
All right, but that's the direct perception of ordinary, quote unquote, self-awareness is a separate category. Correct?
You know, I think grammatically speaking, the way you're saying it is backwards. These are yogic direct perceivers, sense direct perceivers, not direct perception of the sense, but sense direct perceivers.
And mental direct perceiver.
Yeah.
So is it sense or
sense direct perceiver?
Self-awareness direct perceivers or mental? Is that the mental?
No, that's separate.
Oops, sorry.
That's separate.
Why don't you
sense direct perceivers, self-awareness direct perceiver, yogic direct perceiver. Oh, sorry.
Did you put the mental before the yogic?
This is the order I received them in. I don't know if they're in any particular order. They meant
그거 같이 새겨요 말 왕병은숨 왕병은숨 테마 이경은숨 테마 라링은숨 테마 나중은숨 테마즈 데다도 스탕나 되버려.
I just put them in chat for you from Lati Rinpoche's book.
Okay, so
to be clear, it's
sense direct perceiver was first, mental direct perceiver,
okay.
Geshe-la said was second,
되니 라리
self-awareness direct perceiver,
되니 나중은숨
and yogic
Yoga.
direct perceiver
Okay.
is the order that he said would be okay to have those in. Let's see.
I went ahead and posted them from Lati Rinpoche and Elizabeth Snapper's book, Lo Rigdon.
Okay. thank
Okay,
you.
yeah. there it is.
I wrestle with this a lot in contemplation and particularly in languaging of teaching yoga in a way that also teaches to the mind and the stilling of the mind, also in meditation. And so the self-awareness, the direct perception of self-awareness, would that be looking directly at what the state of the mind is, or what are the thoughts or the afflictions that are arising, but then there's a part that's separate from that? And that's kind of what my question was last week, was there is, for example, there is the suffering of craving, but then the awareness of craving does not suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I'm getting back to that thing.
Okay.
Um,
And let me finish, and I'm gonna I will ask that question next, and I'll finish what Geshe-la was saying here in regards to, or in regard to something earlier, where we were talking about clarifying how the mind comes to the point of a yogic direct perception, for example. So we have the 10 bhumis, and when we reach the path of seeing, that is the first, that is the first bhumi. One has entered into onto the stages of the path called the bhumis. That's number 1, and it goes from 1 till the 10. And 10 is divided into 2. It has a beginning part of 10 and the end. Those are the 10 bhumis. And Geshe-la said, as far as the mind becoming more knowing and clearer, we hit the path of seeing. And then it isn't until we get to working on the 8th to the 9th bhumi where we're eliminating the emotional obscurations. So there's 2 categories that obscure. So from the path of seeing all the way to through the 9th path, we're eliminating these emotional obscurations. So there's 2 categories of obscurations. Emotional obscurations and cognitive obscurations are also called what obscures our wisdom, the obscuration to wisdom. And up until path 9, we're eliminating emotional obscurations. So once we have reached that point and we're at the end of 9, then all of any emotional sway or influence is gone. And we have a completely, we've really cleared that obstacle, that veil. We've completely cleared away, slowly erasing, that veil, and it's gone. And that the mind becomes clearer and clearer through that process. But then in the 9th bhumi, we still have cognitive obscurations, and these are very, very, very subtle. Like taking, like once you've taken a pencil and you've erased the major marks that you've written on a paper, there you can still see a little, and you really still have to scrub finally right that end of what is to be removed. And that's like the cognitive obscurations, and that is some very fine work that's being done in the 9th and the beginning of the 10th bhumi. Okay, so through actually 8 and 9 and 10. So actually we begin eliminating cognitive obscurations on the 8th bhumi. On the 9th bhumi, we're continuing to remove the cognitive obscurations, and it is the 10th dine gupagi tama lepdu dine. Oh, chuba, yeah. So and so in the 10th, again, it has a beginning section and the final section. And the second section at the very end of the 10th bhumi, that's when the finest of faintest of cognitive obscurations is now removed. And from the obscurations, from the condition of the obscurations being removed, one now reaches the path of complete freedom, of being liberated from those obscurations, and has reached of a Buddhahood through this process. And this all happens all at once. So when one has reached the very end of the 10th bhumi and the very last faintest speck of a cognitive obscuration is eliminated all at one time simultaneously. One reaches this state of all knowing, this state of liberation. That's a process, that's something that happens all at once. Morangi Triwa Anidira Begeshwa Diyangire. Morangi Triwa Dire Pena di Yigi Ngunsum di Tsema
이경은 숨참아.
Yigi Ngunsum Sema Dang Rangriki Ngunsum Sema Gi Keba Kariore. Mixelgi Rangriki Ngunsum Sema
라리 숨참아서 내가 라리 시도라 진남 시거든 진배남 받진. 라리 율라 시바마도 라리 율라 치 주균이요 말에. 치체. 제가 시바치기 율라 시반 진 율전진은 진용도라 텔라 라리 라브레. 진남 라레. यानी जेंडीला जून आकारसा जूनम लग रहे ता जेंडी किसे बात है जूनम यान मिंग मारा तागोर ता तेरे चीजू लसोबा ता बंदामिंदा जिंगेंदला जूनम शिबे युले शिबा जिंगेंदला जिनम रारी की जिंगेला जिनम लग रहे
La so dene yigi ngunsum gi sema gi keba kari.
이경은 숨이 율라다 강 치최당 용그로와.
La so. Dene rangriki ngunsum gi sema gi yul di semni sheba.
sheba 만도 점바 치 중화 균이 레고 말해.
Okay. So the difference between direct, mental direct perception and how did we call it here? I said self-awareness, could be self-knowing, direct perception, however it was there. Let's just see. Yeah, well, self-knowing, direct perception, or kind of like self-awareness is more of like the literal translation, self-awareness, direct perceiver, is that when you have a mental direct perceiver, this is still at the point where there are outer objects being perceived. So it is our mental consciousness directly perceiving. There's still an outer object. It's interacting with an outer object. When we have self-awareness direct perception, the object of perception is consciousness itself, not an outer object.
So Diane, the translation that I put on here in chat comes from Elizabeth Napper, and she was translating Lati Rinpoche. And she says that the function of a self-knower is just to make possible memory of former consciousnesses. And that it does not have an active role in introspection or self-awareness, even though its name suggests that.
Okay, yeah, see, I think knower, that's why I liked awareness. Because awareness doesn't, it's not as like, yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It has a different, that's good to know. But that's what Geshe-la says, is that what self-awareness, direct perception is aware of is aware of consciousness. Whereas mental direct perception is aware of an outer object.
So it's basically just being aware of the first person of every memory or experience. Me. What I am labeling as me.
Dene rang rik ngonsum gitsema ani kandre ani kandre pechik shagna
sentam badan najurchugu marangimen dodun tangyu ndugu marari.
So actually, this is something that comes up with the mind-only school and the Sautantrikas, the Prasangika. Yeah, Sautantrikas. They assert ani samsampayang la.
Sentamben dode patate ndogire ta tangyurun dogumara midokende tangyurade.
Wow.
So the Sautantrika, so as far as self-awareness goes, this rangrik in Tibetan,
Chembetage rari yoba tugu arda chembetage.
That the prasangikas do not accept it. They refute it. They don't accept it. However, mind-only school and Sautantrikas do accept it. Prasangika anikengi la yankirchik kenla.
Rari dogengi rari kandis tugu arda kezang chembetage rari yoba tugu arda temba.
So the way that so prasangikas again are the only ones that do not accept it, but those that do assert its establishment it's established based on the former moment of self-awareness, remembering. So it is the moment that remembers. It's what remembers the moment before. It's the moment that remembers the former moment. And that's what they say self-awareness is. It's aware of the former moment. Awareness of the former moment. So, Gaynell, does that help you?
It does. So what is the basic upon
I didn't ask
prasangika? How do they refute that? How do they negate that?
Okay.
And is that negation based on valid cognition, i.e. the first moment that something is cognized?
Dine uma tajorwa ki kema lampade de ranrek ki ngosum ki tsama kema lampade kare latene konso ani kelengi yomare.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ta rari zana ne thume sheba thume tende thume chadu ure lagyo rakhe.
Thume sana.
Thupa meba. Ta tin joje sheba mangbu ji ja ura. Ta yon thuen war te su kanga yon yore. Senzam ba kaptu ta rari tupche ta rari ga tha te su kanga yongre.
So it's coming. The answer to that specific question is coming, but what they assert, so their reason for refuting the actual like existence, like intrinsic existence of self-awareness, is that self-awareness is, so it's related to the moment before, and that moment is related to the moment before that, and that moment is related to the moment before that, and that one, and so you can just keep going further back and back and back.
So if it's the perception of consciousness itself, then consciousness then is relating to the previous moment and the moment before that and the moment before that. And so the question then becomes, is the Madhyamaka valid cognition that simply is the first moment of knowing something, where there is not an awareness of a former moment?
Okay, so would that...
And is that awareness? See, there's this query that I have about is there a difference between consciousness and awareness? Is consciousness kind of like, the movement of the mind? It's predicated upon the previous moment, and is awareness simply resting in the present moment? If that makes sense. I'm not sure it does.
It does. It's complex. Yes, it makes sense to me, actually. So in order to add, I only say that because that helps me to ask it. I'm not saying I understand the answer. I just understand how to ask it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do either. So.
So ani geshe-la.
No.
That's kalikapore. Tangpo dire. Di rikpa dang or rangrik dang shepa ki keba kari yore. Dene rangrik ki ngonsun du sama umatal jorwe ani kelengi yomare.
Tere.
Kelengi yomare. Yenayang ani kangyin sana tangpo dire ani rangrik dang shepa gi keba kari yore.
다 라리 시디가라 티 율레 셰바지 제인자 민디 라리 제 따르마도 인기 셰바랑 로와 셰바지 율제나 셰바지 율레 셰바제 인자다 코르 시 디왕 라리 제 따르 수수수수 통화즈리 그지 때리다
Okay.
디 덴디 민지 따르마도 인규 셰바랑레
Lasso dene rangrik di takche chekin rebe.
다 그 셰바데 율제데 셰바데라 그 따지 지거로 그냥 이 율제긴 셰바데 그 따지 지거로
Lasso. Dene di shepa yerpa hakokin rangrik.
다 라리게티
Rangrik.
라리 조나타 에 셰바지기 율라 셰바지 율젠지 셰바니지 셰바지 율젠지 셰바지 율제데 데 율젠데라 라리 제민타레
Dene ni yorepe chikre.
아이
Ni yorepe yamena
데
chikre.
율도 율젠 가가로 왔다 율예 라리도 율젠데로 와 디 율도 그르베 셰바진 여러와 셰바니 차서 율제겐지다 율젠제겐지
Lasso. Dene chikpa chikyang mare.
지버지경 말아 왔다 공가 지작으로 와
Oh, lasso. Okay, so first let me start here.
타니 따빠잠레마도 주르도 셰발 주르도 라리즈데 셰발 주르도 줘야 가고 인기랬다 타니 때니 따빠르지 라린 더겐데 주기
So the difference between self-awareness and awareness itself, that was the question that I asked. What is the difference between this term, like self-awareness, because we have self-awareness direct perceiver. And then we have consciousness. So what is the difference between these two? And Geshe-la said that self-awareness is the subject that is aware of consciousness. So we have these two. Self-awareness is not consciousness itself.
Right.
It is the subject that is aware of consciousness. So it takes so self-awareness takes consciousness as its object. That's self-awareness.
Correct.
So now, furthering on that, how can I narrow down to your question?
Of what is awareness itself? And how is that different from consciousness, or is it?
I think that's what he just answered, but I will ask again. Dene rikpa, ani rikpa rang dang shepa, chikpa repe kakare. Rikpa.
Rikpa.
Mhm,
Rikpa is the Samjung Sherab Gichajirwa.
mhm.
Samjung Chaya. Shepard is Sosam Chabare.
Mhm. So when we say awareness, so we have mind itself, and we have the functions or plays that come out of mind. Awareness is, so consciousness is mind itself. It is the principal mind. Awareness is one of the things that comes out of mind. It is a mental function.
So I've got a question for you about what you just asked him. I guess in my head, when I heard Gaynell's question, my thought was awareness in Tibetan would be Shejin, but you're asking it as Rikpa. What's the difference between Shejin and Rikpa?
Could you repeat that last thing?
Sorry.
Awareness is mental function that comes out of consciousness itself or out of the mind.
Okay, you're talking to me.
Yeah, I am. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
I just want to clarify.
Yes.
that first.
Consciousness is mind itself.
Right.
It is main mind. It is mind itself.
Okay. Main mind. All right.
So we have two divisions of mind. We have mind itself, which is the principal mind, and then I think there are like 51 mental functions, different things that, you know, and so, and to put those all together in a separate category, they're mental functions or mental activities. Awareness is a mental activity.
Okay.
And consciousness is pure mind, mind itself. And just Mark, so awareness, so Rikpa, awareness. So I think, so Gaynell, I'm understanding so Shejin is actually two words that, so Mark, when I have that, it's both alertness and mental focus. So it's Shejin, it's like, right? So it's got those two.
We say Dempa Dang Shejin.
Drenpa Dang Shejin. Yeah, okay, so Drenpa Dang Shejin. That is more of, so for me, yeah, so
Mental function.
Drenpa.
Yeah, Tempa Shijin.
So we have, so Drenpa Dang Rikpa. So I chose Rikpa.
Rikpa na kwa mangpo orta.
Yeah.
Rikpa ishe sebe Rikpa teta, pet tega karsa or nyumong rakpa. Sem rakpa ngape, yani sem tamuchila Rikpa ishe se Rikpa ta kwa ore.
Yeah.
Rikpa zani chidani sherab ki charto jire.
Yeah. So, and just finishing my, you know, I purposefully picked Rikpa instead of Drenpa or Drenshi, Drenpa, because I was feeling like Gaynell was asking, especially when she was talking about yoga practice and resting in mind and so forth, that it fit better. So Geshe-la said, so I asked him, okay, well, what is the difference between, so anyways, just for everybody, for Mark's question, you know, we have awareness. We can use awareness in many ways too, like, right? Awareness of your object, you know, keep your eyes and your focus on your awareness of your object. And then we have like this other kind of awareness that's within, we use within yoga classes. And I thought that was the one that you were referring to, Gaynell, kind of that use of awareness. It kind of has a different sense. And I asked Geshe-la, what is the difference between those two? The one that Mark referenced and the word that I used, Rikpa. So Drenpa. Yeah.
Tatu ki Rikpa gyuzen koya yore. Rikpa zade sherab ki charto jire inguranda.
And so, Mark, the one Drenpa, aware, it still means awareness. It's still even, it's even translated into awareness. That's really a mental function. That's a mental process, Geshe-la said. Rikpa, also awareness in English, but it's a different word in Tibetan, and I think closer to where we were going with this. He said this really has more to do with wisdom, primordial wisdom. So
Great.
when we, awareness. And so this has to do with primordial wisdom. There's a level of awareness that we can reach in our mind when, for example, in meditation, or Geshe-la said all of the afflictive emotions recede. They recede under, they are inactive, and the mind is very clear, and you are in kind of like a wisdom state of mind. And that's also awareness. That's awareness. So now I'll have to ask more questions on that. But when we say awareness, Geshe-la just added, it has many, we can infer many things, and it has many interpretations. It depends on what you're talking about. Ani Geshe-la dindre yana di yeshe gi cha gi rikpa di nyomong ani dene nupdu dene rikpa di rikpa dang she ani shepa ke ani dralwa kariyore.
Di keparyorta di zoba chimoge nyamnen che tombo cheginde shiri shencheyaji sungdo. Shir shepa de rikpa shenche sidgala kepranjeya de rikpa sidgala hachang ta nyomong rakpato nga shepa rakpato nga ani shepa thamudala rikpaze shepa nyomong de chebi kapji shepa dala shepa sede ta mingde taare shiri shenche digala nyomong de kundo geju or topa geju manda jing gagyu are tezo manga ne kapna shepa tinga sardu gala kundo nga sardu gala ani pe karsore kundo geju ngone ni shepa thamu mundu gyula tela ripa ishe ripa shiri shenche de ripa de tate ripa de injur tape ti thamujire tat yundu ngazu ripa se de 유나 거야 요래. 아니 남제 치중들라 릭바즈 고구래. 그리바야 본도 그리바도 교본도 zel라기로 와. 남제 치중라. 그 릭바즈데 고주 망보여다. 나가지 니르젤라비야 요 말다.
디 콘톡스나 디 남톡 콘톡
군도 geju즈르다 빼 남도 ge중 가야요래. 녀몽 저기 또바치 geju요래.
Okay. So then I asked Geshe-la, dene laso di zokpa chempo gi. Okay, so actually within the practice of Dzogchen, or the great perfection, there is a point where we get to where this like non-conceptual place where all arising thoughts and afflictions, everything is stilled, everything is inactive. This is not in process, this is not in play. It's a deep like form of Dzogchen practice when there are absolutely no arising thoughts or emotions. And actually this is actually the very subtle mind. This is the mind without thought, and it's also deemed awareness or rikpa in the practice of Dzogchen. When you talk from the Dzogchen perspective, when the mind is completely free of arisings, and you are in the fine and subtle mind, you are like resting in like awareness or resting in rikpa. And so at that time, yes, the meaning is the same as actual consciousness, So, back to
Yume sama lagro ate. Yume sama lagre, sem thamo lagre, ripa ishe lagre, ninchik pachikyar dagma sem thamo dre. Ngano to kang gyule yore, ngato ngoja matore mado. Kundo yejugidi kenjin ngoja de chugo mara, 군도 개주가나 데 띵고 ngocha thoyong gore. Tele
When we
deposit
com-
de la verdad. Tere.
So this is mind's natural state, or it's also called the original mind, or the natural state. Is the mind free from all thoughts and arisings? And this is something we all have, but we haven't yet necessarily realized. It's the same thing as we're talking about this awareness within the Dzogchen perspective, this Rikpa. It's the same thing. We just haven't recognized it. It is the mind's natural state, a mind free from all thoughts. And when we actually have the condition of all of the complete cessation of like all arising concepts and so forth, we come to this fine, subtle nature of the original mind, the natural state. And Geshe-la says, so this is awareness in the Dzogchen perspective, the same word, Rikpa. But we can use awareness also, when we're talking in other context. Geshe-la says often when we've been studying this text or talking about awareness, it's been directed, it's had another meaning. Awareness has had another meaning. Again, it's a mental function. It is not the cessation of all mental function. It is actually a mental function. Another time, Geshe-la said in Tibetan, when they use the same word to say that, oh, somebody's really like sharp on their feet, they've got some smart thinking, they're really sharp. We'll use exactly the same word. We'll use rikpa. So really, you have to know what what subject you're talking about.
I have a question. Is that the same or similar to the clear light at the time of death and the perception of the Bardo consciousness? And what obscurations still exist in that state?
At the Bardo consciousness?
Yeah.
And so is this the clear light at the time of death? Dene di chiga gi osel dang ani, like the Dzogchen, like the great perfection.
Chikpare that ripa ishi seyatadang, sem thamo seyatang, nyume sem seyatang, osel seyatang, chikpa chikyang kwa chikpare.
Dene bado di chike bado.
Chike bardo gala sem thamo dungundi kirwarda, ko chi jemba jindre inde chike bardo zide, kene bardo zide, kewa kabla kene bardo lagore, chi jide chike bardo lagore, ani bardo lele bardo sem lagore. Ingu ko ken jenda da te yondu gala ming matanda ji tagar mato, ingu te chikpa chikyang ngazo ese tagar sem thamo tagarang re.
Dene bardogi shepa dela ani chik sungrong di kandre dene di samlo tangyagi no bayore dene kandre di bardogi shepa.
Ta bardo shepa la rindaminda yongura kundo geju manga gen sosi kyo ina te ngoche thugo mare. Te ngoche thusona sangi gore. Tere kundo geju nga manga ge khapare ore. Sem thamo da gadu chike bardo bardo mi kandeji na ti chukzu shergor de ngazo kundo geju nyomong da hajang rakba insa ti ngunjin tugo mare habti ge kabla ngazo de chuzu shergore tijoji de shergore ngaron so nyamnyung me insa ti ngoja de tugo mare te mamboyari te ngoja chube neka mamboyare ko hajang 뒤서 타모지 뒤서 센다 타모지 뒤된 유 퉁퉁지 마다 매 인사 문진 제투고 말아.
So yes, when we talk about coming to that state of mind, free from all arisings, this original mind, the natural state, it is the state that the state of clear light at the time of the Bardo. And so Geshe-la said that, and actually, it's the same. It is this, it's the same subtle mind. It is the natural, state of mind that actually, so that's the bardo at the time of death. And then we have, the bardo of becoming and the bardo of birth. It's the same stream of consciousness, the original mind at the time of becoming, at the time of birth. And it's the same stream of consciousness of the original mind that we have right now. But because, so yes, it is the same. And in the state of the bardo, the mind, it's very fine, and things, happen, very quickly. And because we're so used to having arising thoughts and emotions, it's very likely that at the time of bardo, these will be at the forefront as well. And therefore, we will not recognize, like the clear light at the time of the bardo, we will not realize this subtle nature of mind at that time. Just as we now are more experienced with the process of arising thoughts and a lot of movement in our mind, and therefore that's why we also don't realize that natural state at this point.
So Dzogchen is like a controlled environment near-death experience. Barbara, you agree? Sounds like it. Sounds like you're trying to induce as close to a near-death experience as you can. You're muted, Barb.
Super.
Dead chipu marda, dead chipu mare. Nilam ke kapto lang ngocha thaya yare. But ngocha mampu yare. Di sata mampu yare. Semja hachang thata ngacho nyomong de rakpa ngacho gila nyomong shu dipje gi diba de shu chumboche. Nyomong de shu chumboche. Semja hachang ngo thaboche. Eni di ngocha thugo marwa. Chazang zoba chembo kundo geji toba negap dela eni sheba zening tagodo eni dedan dalwe ka negabla eni riba ze de mingta chebar tusre ta ingo ko ya chembore
Di sheba
ze de nyumo ta kundo geji toba de yobe kabla ta nyumon de chebi sheba dela sheba labrata
la sodene rikpa.
Riba nyumonda dene, ta nyumon rapa, sheba rapa tezo, kundo geju sheba rapa tezo, del nrudugala, ta dene sem chamine kaptela, riba ishiz minta paro.
So not only, that, not only at the time of, for example, Dzogchen practice, do we have an opportunity to experience the natural state, but also, at the time there's the realization of that at the time of dreaming. So we can, for example, realize clear light of dream and so forth, this natural state at the time of dreaming. There are actually many different times that we have an opportunity to recognize the natural state. But because we usually have a lot of arising thoughts and emotions, we're kind of rather than in a very still state, we're in a very reactive state. The state of mind, the natural state, is something very, very subtle and fine. So it's not something gross and coarse, it's subtle and fine. It's very, very easily covered and obscured, veiled so that we cannot see it. And all of these arising thoughts and many things obscure it. And so it's covered due to our regular, the things that we habitually do that are very, our regular activities just shade it and they cover it, and therefore we don't see it, we don't perceive it, we don't recognize it. And we have an opportunity, so when we have the Dzogchen practice is a time where we can have all of the arising thoughts subside and recede. And then when there are no arising thoughts or emotions, then we come to that state to realize that that stream of consciousness, our natural state or awareness, rikpa, the state free from any thoughts.
Is it, and this might be my just misunderstanding, is it that consciousness that will eventually have the direct perception of emptiness?
Tene tong ni ngonsum di token di shepa repe ani kare ngonsum antong ni ngonsum du to.
무슨
Di
떡은
shepa de
래
shepa tomo de.
래 셰바레데 래 동영은 숨 더단다 나중은 숨 자로 그러와 셰바다가랑 셰바데 나중은 숨 자로 그러와.
Yes, exactly right. It is that consciousness that then has the yogic direct perception of emptiness.
I'm going to say this based on what he just said.
그래서
I
맞아요.
believe, oh, sorry.
야, 맞아 이게 셰바데 단데 셰바 참모데 락바데 망가 녀몽 가정 가들이 셰바라방 가지고 와래. 셰바라바 가정 가들이니 셰바 참모는 살루 누구 와래. 되니 녀의 관계니 대응어저 퇴 렐라차고 와래.
Kare wongi?
가지 녀와 냠뇽
Oh, nyam.
녀 관계. 다가 수수규래 맹엔지 지 라고 말와 상계의 육자등 아주 규래 여러 샘기라지 어서와 디만은 루브로와서 숨도 아니 너에나라 샘마치데 샘기라지는 어서와 숨도 샘기라진라 디메 레바메와 라진기 따바레즈 라진 양대 숨고와 때 인디 가나주 길레 때sem데 이 급자등 아주 길레 열와
Rangjin dakpa.
오 라진기 때 샘타몰라 디밀레 요마와 디마 라진기 따차로
Dijela dine rangjin dakpa.
오 라진 양대라 그럴때라
Nyangde, okay.
디메이나 맞아 상게 몰람게 코랑 요마르 두비아 코랑 요마레 디 상게 입자 쪼데 때리 맞아 길레 요요 말해 딱 해버가지 란치스요 해버가지 란치스요 란치스요 메게 던디게 딱 해비시주지 얼마다 요경 안가서 길에 이게 샘타모들이 잠바 주고 주사요 말해
And so what we need to understand when it comes to this realization that, this realization of emptiness, for example, that you bring up, is in the beginning, our mind is full of a lot of coarse activity and emotions and reactions and thoughts. It's full of a lot of action. And as we begin to practice, we begin to eliminate the arisings of these thoughts and emotions. We actually begin to put an end to them and obstruct them from arising. And when that's the case, rather than having a mind that is full of a lot of coarse, crazy activity, the mind becomes free of that, and the mind becomes stiller and clearer and clearer and clearer. And as we gain experience in that, this is a process that continues on like that. It becomes stiller and it becomes clearer and clearer. And this is the process of coming to a realization. it's not that any one of us has anything missing. There's nothing that we need. There's no missing ingredient that we need to get out there. Everything that we have is already self-contained. The potential for Buddhahood is already contained. The clear light, natural state of mind is already within. And it is our experience that, we just haven't experienced it yet, but also within. So we have a completely stainless state within that is already there. It is completely stainless. It is luminous, and is the potential for Buddhahood. And within the sutras, the words of the Buddha himself has said that this mind is completely untainted, untouched, unstained. It is the completely pure nature, and it is the nature of nirvana. It is naturally nirvana. We have natural nirvana within us. So it would make no difference if we just pray and pray saying, I wish to be enlightened, I wish to become enlightened. We don't need to do that. Actually, the potential is already there. Everything we need, what we are seeking, that is already there. And it is this, but the thing is it's very, very, very fine. And so, however, when we talk about realization and what it is to be realized, that's what we point to, the natural state, which is this very subtle state of consciousness.
Diane, what I was going to say was, I feel like there's no way Geshe-la can answer this because it's a scientific thing, but I don't know if anyone else would get this. But I feel like there is a relationship between the form realm, formless realm, and desire realm, and the different brainwave frequencies, theta, delta, and Barb, you're nodding. That there must be, that to me, it seems like the language that's being used by Tibetans in that tradition, and little hints of what we experience in, the awakened or, our movement active mind, which is alpha and beta, and then our creative mind, which is theta, and then this absolute blank, which is delta. To me, there seems to be a relationship that we just can't put our finger on. And Barb's got her hand up. I've got to hear what she has to say.
Well, there's a gamma in there too. There's a high gamma that happens after your alpha and between theta and delta.
And within that embedded is epsilon.
They have been studying that, back in the 90s when I was getting trained in biofeedback, that was an awareness of that. And they've come forth with better equipment. So it's just like back to quantum physics. The scientists are not there yet because they're still believing, the technicians are still believing what the theorists have gone out and said, well, let me push this a little bit more. So where they are with biofeedback today is they have gone way beyond that. And that's incorporated in a lot of the neuroscience. So yeah, you're absolutely right, there is, but the refinement of the equipment is not there so it can really gauge what all those levels are. I mean, that high beta and the gamma are new, within the last 10 to 15 years. So there's something else on the outskirts of this.
Well, Barb,
probably go right in with, the light of clear awareness or light of all of this.
Barb, when you mentioned gamma, when you mentioned the gamma frequency, that high, what they found in the high frequency of gamma is embedded within it is an even lower state of epsilon.
Well, and your body is just quiet. So it is Dzogchen, really.
Yes.
So it's all there, it's Dzogchen.
Isn't that what he said?
Huh?
Isn't that what he said?
In a different language.
Kind of, but
well, exactly. I think that's what he said.
But
he
I'm
said
saying,
it in a different. What Barb and I are doing is talking about the science side.
I know.
The science.
Yeah.
Well, yes, it said that. We believe that, Larry, because we know that. But the scientific equipment is not totally to the point of being able to prove that. And science is about proof, but science also goes beyond its own proof in the theory of it to gain expanded knowledge.
I was just saying that it sounds exactly the same, that of what he was saying, you know, it's exactly, you're right on the same topic,
Yeah.
for sure.
Feels like it.
This is why His Holiness has brought the science into,
Yes.
you know, the Buddhism, because they're all going to the same, you know, but it's the Western and the Eastern mind. So yeah.
And the big thing that's missing is the scientists will not even talk about consciousness.
Not
They
true.
see it as an
Not true.
epiphenomenon.
Not true. The theoretical scientists are talking about consciousness.
Well,
They are
you know what I mean.
practicing meditation. They are engaging in it. They are expanding their equipment so that, you know, because it's creative. So they're just like you and I are with our meditation and our practice. We're going places we never thought we were ever going to go. Supernatural.
I meant the scientific community as a whole isn't there yet. What you're talking about is like the pioneers and so on are there.
All right, let me ask you, Mark, is the Western world really engaged in Buddhism to the degree, and this whole idea to the degree that we are in this room right now?
Not at all.
No, so what, you can't judge science, you know, from that basis. You have to look at the levels, the different levels of science,
Right.
and what their accomplishments, where they are, whether they're theoretician or whether they're really a creative scientist, somebody who really puts it out there, like you.
I'm a color guard instructor. I could teach kids how to throw a flag in the air.
But that's something they didn't do before, didn't know before.
Oh,
Yeah.
I wanted to throw out a question that we don't have time for this week probably, but I want to just and try to remember it next week. What would be the difference between the realization of no self and the realization of emptiness?
Lasso, dene triwaji di sanyin ki chedure. Tanda pelcher ani duzo zoso.
Chizutu the karma nishu senga chakuta. Yeah.
Right, Geshe-la says up to you guys if we want to answer this question now or do we want to answer it next week. It looks like a short one, so maybe I will
if it's
just
a short one, it's a short one.
It's a very quick question, but okay, it's very quick. Ani kebar ani kareore pena di tongi topa dang mepa. Did you mean selflessness of the person or just selflessness of phenomena, or
the realization of that you know there is no self?
Okay, of a person.
Well, of any, whatever. It's everything, I think.
Kansaga dame tamoto bala chuki dame tamoto bangundu rogolare.
Ani tongni topa dang gangzaki dagmegi topa chikparupe kakare. Or keba kari.
Kansaga dame tamoto bala tongi to urwa. 제가 간사 다음에 초봉 용수도 받지 침바지 또 발라 추기 다음에 마도 바 간사 다음에 또 요 말에 간사나 간사게 라든지 짐바데 지디 추기다 지디 풍부기 지거와.
So the difference between the realization of emptiness and the realization
예바데 하다 제마들 랭게나 야그래.
Sanima Jemal.
No.
So
Geshe-la,
So we're only about 5 minutes away from being an hour over, Geshe-la said. So he would like to answer most of this next week. However,
Good. Yeah.
something to think about in between now and then. Geshe-la said, first of all, you have to understand that when it comes to having a realization of the selflessness of person, the selflessness of oneself, that this depends first on having a realization of the selflessness of phenomena. Because the belief in a self, the clinging to the truth of a self, is based on our clinging and fixation to a true reality in the aggregates, in the aggregate. Understanding of the. Are you okay?
No.
Okay. So, unless we have a realization of the emptiness of phenomena, we cannot have a true realization at the fine point that we need to, a very refined point that we need to have a realization of an emptiness in self. Because our belief in a self is based on a belief in the aggregates. And so I asked Geshe-la again, so is there a difference, what is the difference? So back to your original question, difference between emptiness, a realization of emptiness, and the realization of selflessness. He said, when you realize, selflessness, you're realizing the emptiness of something. So that is a realization of emptiness. But all of that.
That is, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what Geshe-la said.
They're one and the same.
You realize emptiness when you realize selflessness. Danae, yeah. And we can reiterate that with Geshe-la next Sunday.
Good. That's what I was shooting for there. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, but everything is based on first the realization of a lack of intrinsic existence in phenomena, and that's a very, very important point. It all hinges on that, because our belief in a self and anything else is based on aggregate things such as form and feelings, belief in all of those things. So we first must eliminate that.
Yeah, I've got, and along that line, maybe next week, I don't know. I have like a couple other directly related question marks. I'm just trying to put the dots together,
Okay, well, and next week, Geshe-la says your knees, everyone is probably ready to get up and move around. So we'll save remaining questions for next week.
This was a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks to everybody.
Thank you.
Geshe-la.
Thank you.
Now,
Okay.
yeah.
Now dedication,
Wow.
6:30. Chanju Samchor Rimboche, Make Pano, Kinguchi, Kawa Nyamba, Nevaye, Kone, Kondo, Pewa Rasho, Kari Rave, Kurvi Shingante, Pendandewa, Malin Jungwene, Cherezimo, Tendin, Jabe Side Bardo, Tengurchi, Jambal Pawe, Chitra, Kimbato, Kondo Sampo, Teyan, Tejinto, Teda, Kungi Sudalok. Gewandita Tamja Rabdung, Sum Shibi Gawa, Tamjiki, Makana Chodunga, Rajingi, Savan, Zambochi Rabdung, Oraki.
Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. In the land encircled by snow-white mountains, the source of all happiness and benefit flows in your person, Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Remain until samsara ends. Just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri attained omniscience and Samantabhadra too, so now I dedicate these merits to train and follow in their footsteps. As all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and future praise dedication as supreme, so now I too dedicate these sources of my merit for all beings to perfect good actions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Think more.